Mac Studio and Unreal Engine 5 with the argument of, oh, it's not good at 3000, 4000, 5956 RTX, whatever, from NVIDIA or whomever that company is. There are a couple of things that we need to look at, and from an objective standpoint, or at least from as much of an objective standpoint as much as we can. First, Epic and Apple, they had a big debacle between them. It was like a kid fight. I was not a fan of that. And that did result in Epic in general not having their engine, which is Unreal Engine 5, performing well on the new Macs in general, the whole M1 Macs lineup. Whether we are talking about the MacBook Pro, whether we are talking about the new Mac Studio, which is meant for the studio. So there is no optimization for the Mac Studios or the M1 Macs in general just yet. At least not an official one. There are rumors and there are some tweets about, oh, this would actually happen, but we have not seen it yet, and rumors do not put food on the table. With that out of the way, the second point is the fact that everything we are testing with Unreal Engine 5 so far is in beta or being tested. It's either a preview, which is simply a preview, it's like a sneak peek, or it's an early access. So basically you have an early access to a software that has not been finished just yet. So that is something we need to take in mind as well. Because by the end of the day, if you really want to do professional work or whatever that might be, you would not be using Unreal Engine 5, at least not yet with the stage that it's at right now. You might be using the official release, which is 4.27.2, I believe at this point it is. So with all of that, you would be reading something like, oh, the performance is not up to NVIDIA graphic cards or whatever that might be. An NVIDIA graphic card would cost more than the base model of the Mac Studio, just the graphic card by itself. So you are comparing that graphic card to a whole computer. And that would not be fair because you are comparing that one piece, which the price of is cost more than the whole base model Mac Studio, and you want it to perform better than this piece that you are buying alone. It doesn't work this way. You get what you pay for. So far, all the testing that I have been doing was on the base model M1 Mac Studio. So you are comparing that Mac Studio with an RTX 3900 or 90, whatever the number is. And it just doesn't work this way, because that is not the comparison that you want to make. The comparison that you want to make is bring a PC that is comparable in specs to the M1 Max if we want to talk specs, because we always know Apple devices, on paper, they are less powered. On paper, they are not as powerful. On paper, they are not as great. However, they always perform better than any other counterpart, and you would have a much better experience, not only just with the software that you are using, in case it was optimized, but as well you will have a better case of using the whole entire system. And people not only buy Macs because they want to use Unreal Engine 5 or whatever that might be. They buy the Macs because it's a whole integrated experience no other company can match. And the systems that we are having and we do have access to, they are three. So you have Linux and their distros. My favorite distro would probably be Elementary OS. And I used to like Debian, but that's a conversation for another time. And then we have Windows, and me personally, Windows I just will not use it for work. Windows is disgusting. I'm sorry, but Windows, the whole user experience since Windows 8 and then 10 and now with the 11, the whole Windows experience is just ugly. And then you have Mac OS. And Mac OS has the best what Windows has to offer and Linux distros has to offer. With Linux distros, if you are a developer, you really depend on your terminal, and it's a very big part of whatever you are doing. For example, for me, I really like to establish everything using a terminal. I don't use a GUI system or anything like that. So if I want to commit my code or whatever that might be, I would be always using the terminal because that's what the terminal is meant for. And if you are a developer, you should be using the terminal anyway. On the other hand, Linux in general have a very poor support when it comes to the software that we want to to use. Granted, you can use a Blender on Linux, but that's about it. If you want, for example, to use Adobe products, none of them are available. If you want to use Affinity products, such as me, none of them are available. And according to my knowledge, and you can correct me if I'm mistaken, if you want to use Unreal Engine on Linux, you cannot use it. Now, I am not talking about Wine and running software through Wine. I understand you can do certain things with Wine. I'm talking about officially, because if we're talking about, oh, tweak that to do this, then the whole conversation will be different. We're talking about an experience that is right out of the box. And that's where Windows comes in, because Windows does support the previous software that I did mention, but the user experience with Windows is ugly. You have the blue screens, and it's still a huge issue whether we want to admit till today or not. You have the very random updates in the middle of doing something or working on something. All of the sudden, your Windows is a blue screen and it's updating, and you have to wait 50 minutes or whatever that might be just to wait for it to update, and it forces the update on you. It's not like you do have a choice to update or not.
Dr. Chan, recalculate the new thruster data and relay it to Blue Oyster called immediately instance.
Okay, roger that, Doctor.
Fuck! What's wrong?
Seriously, auto-updating now? General, I won't be able to calculate the right data for the satellite for 49 minutes.
How long till impact?
11 minutes and 44 seconds.
Fuck Microsoft!
If you go to macOS, as I said, it has the best of both worlds. It has the support for software, and it has the cleanness of using a Linux system or a Unix-based system or a distro. And macOS is a Unix-based system anyway, which is great, because that means you do have access to something like the terminal if you want. And on top of all of that, the aesthetic of using macOS and the cleanness of using macOS is just beautiful. There is a reason why many professionals choose to do their work on Mac. It's just because aesthetically pleasing, and everything is a plug and play. If you are doing real work, you don't want to go to your customer and be like, well, my machine was updating, so I couldn't finish my product that you wanted me to do on time. Or you cannot be like, oh, well, while using Wine was not updated, so I cannot use the new Unreal Engine 5, so I can finish my work, or Unreal Engine 4, or whatever that might be. Mac OS, you will not be saying those things. Mac OS would remove the barrier between you and the machine, or you and the software, and it would be you using that software. Getting back to the specs, because if you are watching this video and you are watching my channel for the past week, probably you are a person who cares about the specs. And for me, I try to be an Apple channel, but at the same time do highlight the specs a little bit, but not entirely. Keep that in mind. The machine that I am comparing now, spec-wise, and a lot of people comparing that to the RTX 3900 or 3090, is the base model Mac Studio, which runs for $2,000, have 512 gigabyte of SSD, which I do not recommend and I still do not recommend, and has the M1 Max with 10-core CPU, 24 cores for the GPU. So basically, we are talking about an integrated graphic card that is merged with the CPU, so they are the same thing, the same SoC, and that graphic card shares the RAM or the memory that you have on the device with the RAM for the device, because usually integrated graphic cards that they are not discrete and by themselves take their virtual memory VRAM from the RAM that you have on the device, and on the device we have 32 gigabyte of RAM, which means if the 24 core GPU took 16 gigabyte of RAM, what's left for the system is 16 gigabyte of RAM, and on paper that is weak. And you take that and compare it to 3090, which at least have, I believe it's either 16 or 24 gigabyte of discrete virtual RAM, VRAM, and you want that piece, which is alone, cost more than the Mac Studio, and you want the Mac Studio to perform better than that. You can have that with the Ultra if you want to go all the way up to spending $5,000 to have the Ultra and such. You will be able to have a comparable performance, and that was the comparison that we even saw from Apple. You will have a comparable performance, plus add a less power consumption if that is important to you. For me, power consumption I couldn't care less about, but I do care about how much heat my machine is producing, because I do have a fully spec'd out PC that cost me like $6,000. And when I turn that freaking thing, the whole room will become warm, because there's just so many components in, and each one have its heat output, because you do have the Threadripper and you do have the RX 6900 XT. On top of that, you do have the 1200 watt power supply, and even the freaking motherboard has a fan so it can cool itself, and there's a cooler on top of the SSD so the SSD can be cooled as well, because everything is jammed. Even though it's a mid tower, everything is jammed inside. And that brings a point that I will be talking further about in the video, which is noise. And that's important to me as well. I would like my machine to be silent. But getting back to the specs, if you go to the up to the $5,000 machine with the M1 Ultra and 128 gigabyte of RAM, because then when you have 128 gigabyte of RAM, the virtual memory for the M1 Ultra, it can go up to 64 gigabyte of virtual memory, and because you have a higher bandwidth, then we are having a conversation that is comparable between the RTX 3090 and then the Mac Studio. So the first comment is, thank you for the video, you're very welcome. I like people when they say thank you. Like, it's simple, but it actually makes a difference for me. The GPU render that we are looking at, there is 1 minute and 20 seconds versus 1 minute and 30 seconds, and that's 11% faster. However, the scaling for the GPU is 24 cores versus 32 cores, which means it's an increase of 33% of GPU cores or power. Those results in that regard are bad, don't you think? Because that means there is absolutely no scale. That is true. But there are two things that we need to look at. First, access to virtual RAM, to virtual memory. With the 24 cores, we had access to less RAM, less memory than when we had access to 32 cores. Because my machines, with my 32 core, I have the fully spec'd out, which means I do have the 8 terabyte of SSD, plus I have the 64 gigabyte of RAM. And on the other machine, which is the Mac Studio, I had 32 gigabyte of RAM with a 24 core GPU, a plus 512 SSD. Now, why I am bringing the SSD here? Because if I needed more RAM, we will be using swap memory, and the swap memory would come off of the hard drive. Plus, the higher terabytes that you have on your hard drive, the faster it will be. Because 512, it's only 2 gigabyte per second. But if we are going to the 8 terabyte, it's 7 gigabyte per second. So there's that difference. On top of that, the software that we are testing by the end of the day, which is Unreal Engine, is not optimized, which means you will see those differences. And one simple example is on the Mac Studio, the MetaHuman project, with my most recent video, the MetaHuman project, the character, when they are talking, the mouth does not move. Now, I would put that project on a hard drive and bring it to my M1 Max, which is the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and we are still in the M1 Max. Still M1 Max there and M1 Max here. However, it runs just as fine on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. Maybe because Epic had enough time probably to optimize for the Mac Pro, since it has been released for around half a year now, while the Mac Studio is only recent. Or maybe because there is no optimization, we are seeing those differences on the same architecture, but two different form factors of a form that is a laptop, which should perform worse, but it doesn't. And then you have a Mac Studio, which is a PC that should perform better, but it doesn't. So it's not a comparison of an orange to an orange. It's a comparison between an orange and a pineapple. They are both have that certain taste, but one of them is yellow from the inside and one of them is orange on the inside. The second and the last comment before I move into my last point and end with this: what are you using to track the CPU and the GPU? Well, Daryl, as much as I love you, it would have been really nice to say thanks for the video, but is it just the activity monitor? Because it's too blurry to see. Yes, my friend, it's just the activity monitor. That was my answer. Then good deal, thanks. And I get 1 minute and 24 seconds for the render time on the Studio Max with 32 cores. I was expecting better, honestly, but glad to see that you have a similar results, or else I have thought I do have a problem. And again, that goes back to the conversation of the software is not optimized and how much RAM do you have. If you have 32 gigabyte of RAM and 32 cores, they do not play well together. You need to have 64 gigabyte of RAM in order to give the full virtual memory to your graphic card or to your graphic unit in this instance. And we are treating the 32 cores of GPU like it's a separate graphic unit, but it's not. By the end of the day, it's an integrated graphic card that is inside the chip of a CPU, or in this case, an SoC. And as I said in my comments to him, because this conversation was around a Blender, I was like, if you want to see jaw-dropping numbers, go ahead and try Cinema 4D. Now, granted, Cinema 4D is expensive. I do have access to it for a low cost of a price because I am a student, but I understand if you are not a student, probably, what is it, $300 a month or $3,500 to buy the software is not a cheaper price tag comparing to Blender, which has the best price tag ever, free. Zero. Plus, Apple did invest in a Blender recently. Right after that investment, which I believe it was announced around October of last year, it took 4 months for Blender to announce, oh, we have an official support for Blender now, but it's in the early stages as well. And that's not Apple's fault, by the way, so you cannot fault them for that. The last point of conversation that I want to bring is, and the last point that I want to talk about is the noise. I would like my machines to be silent. And so far, I am recording and doing everything through my 16-inch MacBook Pro, and it's completely silent. If there is a noise, it's actually from my light, which my light is producing more noise than my 16-inch MacBook Pro, which I have GarageBand and RPG software open, and I have Final Cut Pro open, and I am sure I have Xcode and Sublime Text open, because those softwares I will never close them. And I am sure I have at least 50 tabs open, separated between Google Chrome and Safari, and the machine is completely silent. While you cannot say the same about a Windows machine, because when you turn it on, that thing is like a jet ready to fly. Because even your power supply, if you have a decent power supply that does match the specs that we are talking about, the 3090 or whatever, you need at least 1000 watt of power supply or 1200, because NVIDIA graphics cards are power hungry. And that by itself, that power supply has a fan as well, so it needs to be cooled. And then at the same time, it literally makes the room warm. And I started with PC, by the way. I am only started in the Apple world in 2017. Since I was, 11 years old, I used to build my own computers and my own PCs, and I used to hate Apple. I was like, if you tell me Apple, I would be like, get out of here. Because I thought they have a very high price tag for a low-powered spec sheet. But then when I tried them back in 2017, I was like, nah, this is a whole different ballgame. Because the more that I look into their mission and what they are doing, the more that I like them. They do care about the environment, which is something very important to me. I do care about recycling, and they do all of that. And I do care about privacy, and they take that into account. And they make aesthetically pleasing hardware and software, and that is something very important to me. That's why I make sure all my software is very clean when it comes to the UI and the UX, the user experience and the user interface. So by the end of the day, all of these are tools. Let's allow ourselves to celebrate them and enjoy them as well.